when you try and look like a businessman to be thematic with the video, but instead you just look like Shane Dawson. Hey, what's up you guys? My name is Amber, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to be discussing American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. This book does happen to be incredibly disturbing and horrific, so while I could sit here all day going on with a list of very specific trigger warnings, I'm just going to leave it with the blanket of there being a lot of racism, sexism, and homophobia involved, as well as very crude and graphic depictions of rape, torture, and murder. So if any of these things are liable to be incredibly triggering for you, please have extreme discretion while watching the rest of this review or reading the book. Now, some of you watching this may only be familiar with the movie version of the book, but that being said, the movie compared to the book, child's play. The book is 10 times more graphic and disgusting and crude and horrifying. So definitely keep that in mind if you do choose to read it. Now, the book follows a 26-year-old Patrick Bateman, a wealthy elitist businessman, as he goes about his day-to-day life with different personal dealings with friends and acquaintances, his opinions on different pop culture relevancies, and the intense torture and murder of a variety of different people. The book definitely starts out fairly normal. I mean, we are very quickly affronted with the very intense nature of the book, but we really don't get to see a lot of the more psychotic elements until approximately 100 pages in. And then we really start to get a small taste for the bloody nature of Bateman, and as the book continues, it just escalates very rapidly and graphically. While the nature of the book is definitely very disturbing to read, it is very important to note that it is intentionally exaggerated to the point that it is, because it is intended to be a satire. It is not a traditional horror read where you would just have these creepy or horrific elements for the sake of being horrific, but it is definitely elevated to the max in order to satirize a variety of different topics. Depending on how you choose to read the book and which emphases you put on different elements of the book, it can be read as a satire of competitive natures, vanity, consumerism, materialism, racism, homophobia, toxic masculinity, sexism and misogyny, objectification, misinformation, Wall Street culture, hypocrisy, and depersonalization. Alternately, it could also be interpreted as a satire of the horror genre itself. However, based on the time that the book was written, I don't think that that was necessarily the intent, because it was from the 90s, which didn't really have the emergence of the truly horrific and demented horror that we end up having today, especially because, like, nowadays we have things like the torture porn genre and just so many things that are just disgusting for the sake of being disgusting, and because the people creating them are very questionable in their own natures. Whereas the 90s had stuff like Elm Street, Scream, a lot of the more traditional slashers and things that were more fun and less of the genuinely psychotic elements. So I personally don't necessarily think that it was intended to be a satire on the horror genre, but reading it in this day and age, it can definitely be interpreted as such now. Within the book, we do get to see the clothes, the settings, the excessive lavishness of the upper class, described in the same painstaking detail of every violent and heinous act that Bateman commits. And it really shows the emphasis of how the things are truly not that different in the eyes of Bateman. Now, I do understand that the excessive use of description and adjectives is a very intentional stylistic choice to emphasize a lot of the different satirical elements. God, does it make me miss commas and short sentences sometimes. One of the debatably unfortunate things about Ellis is that at the end of the day, he actually is a fairly decent writer. But that means that you are very clearly and easily able to visualize a lot of the horrifying elements that are being described within the book, which does make it that much harder to digest, versus if it had been written poorly, it would be a lot easier to take yourself out of the reading. But we do end up having the ability to very, very easily see a lot of the disgusting violence of the book. However, with that being said, I did notice that I was startlingly less disturbed reading the book this time than I had been before. I have actually read the book one time previously, and it was probably about 5 years ago now. And since that time, I have definitely gotten much more into the horror genre. And part of me almost wonders if I've like desensitized myself to the different horrific descriptions and like gross aspects of the genre, and if that has anything to do with the fact that I wasn't quite as horrified as I had been the first time reading it. I definitely don't think that it was attributed to the fact that I had read it before, because while I did remember a few of the vague highlights, most specifically some of my favorite murders of the book, I really didn't remember a lot of the events that happened otherwise, so it was similar to reading the book for the first time. I just was a bit less disturbed by it, and that in itself kind of disturbs me and could lead into an entire video of just like commentary about the desensitization of different things as a result of media, but we'll keep it short for today. Part of me has to wonder how reliable as a narrator Bateman actually is, and whether or not the vocalizations of his psychotic feelings go unnoticed as part of a satirical commentary on the self-absorbed nature and vanity of the upper class and, you know, Wall Street culture, or if it's actually a blurring of the lines between Bateman's actual reality versus his intrusive thoughts and like sick fantasies. Because there are definitely, you know, different times where Bateman will definitely just vocalize some of the psychotic things that he's thinking or fantasizing about, and it goes completely unnoticed by other people. Granted, those aren't the only things that go unnoticed. He does definitely just make some more standard remarks that also go unnoticed as well, because the book definitely puts an emphasis on just quite how self-absorbed the different characters of the book are, and how a lot of them are just talking to talk and none of them are truly listening or absorbing what any of the others are saying. And there are even some like visualizations and, you know, clear implications of some of the different sick things that he does, you know, blood being on clothes and things like that, that just go unnoticed by others. And part of me does have to lean a little bit towards him being an unreliable narrator, especially as the book goes into later chapters. It's entirely unrealistic for some of the things that Patrick describes to have actually happened the way he's describing them within the book. Now, while a lot of my review has focused on the more horrific aspects of the book, that's not to say that there aren't other elements that go into it as well. For example, I do think that certain aspects of the book are, quite frankly, hilarious in the way that they're exaggerated. Obviously, because it's so horrific, I wouldn't like go anywhere near as saying that the book is funny, but there are definitely certain aspects and scenes that are quite comical. You do have to read it as more of like a dark comedy kind of aspect. But I think one really good example of this, for anybody who's familiar with the movie and has seen it, there is one scene that's very, very infamous from the movie, where it's a scene of all these different business guys are like comparing the designs of their business cards, and Bateman loses his shit because he thinks he is like the best business card, and then all of these other people like show him up and have like much more finite details and like blah blah blah. And it's very, very comical, to me at least, within the film. And within the book there's actually a very, very similar scene that goes on. Not in exactly the same way that it happens in the movie, but it's definitely like obviously the reference to the scene. But there's one particular scene that is exclusive to the book. I don't think anything like this happens in the movie, but it's also been quite a few years since I've watched the film, so there might be something like it. And it's just so like ironically fucking hilarious. Like obviously, you know, still like dark, twisted, not great. But I was just losing my shit at this scene. It's one of the funniest fucking things I've ever read. And I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure it was necessarily meant to be comical, but from a dark humor standpoint, it definitely was. So within the book, there is the character Lewis Carruthers. Lewis Carruthers is a business associate and acquaintance, friend, what have you, of Patrick Bateman. And Carruthers is like very, very clearly into Bateman, but Bateman just has not picked up on that. And Patrick just has a lot of like hatred and resentment towards Carruthers. So at one point, Patrick decides to kill Lewis in the bathroom of like a yacht club that they had been having lunch in. And so like Patrick comes up behind Lewis and like goes in to strangle him. And Lewis mistakes it for Patrick trying to make a move on him. And is like into it. And just like, so Lewis is over here just like thinking it's a great sexy time. And Patrick is like so stunned by this revelation. He like doesn't know what to do. Like he wants to commit to killing him, but he's just so stunned he can't. But also he's like not gay, so he's not into it. And so he's just like, what the fuck? And like pretty much just like stops processing. So like once he's able to like function again, he ends up like booking it the fuck out of there. And so Lewis is just like, well, where are you going? And Patrick is just like,
I've got to return some videotapes.
just the whole scene of just like, there's this man who's just chilling, who's into this other guy who happens to be a psychopath. Psychopath, you know, tries to strangle him. And it's mistaken as just like sexy romance, making a move, trying to go in for the kiss. And it's like, nope. So then the psychopath just dips the fuck out and is like, nope, gotta go return some videotapes. Oh my god, just the whole scene is so fucking funny. I feel like that would be my luck. You know, someone's going to kill me and I'm just like, finally, romance. It's so stupid. There are definitely a few scenes that are kind of comical. So it does add a little bit of like slight reprieve in between all of the other horrifying aspects, like the violent, you know, torture and assault and murders of women, sometimes men, you know, extreme racism, homophobia, just all around disgusting behavior. So the dark humor is definitely very, very welcome. So like at the end of the day, if you're looking to enjoy a read, I definitely would never, like I don't think I would ever actually recommend American Psycho to anybody specifically to read, just because it is so absolutely disgusting. But if you are looking very, very specifically for a satire, I would recommend it, and I would definitely be willing to read the book again in a few years. Like, I don't want to say it's a bad book, because it's not. It's like written well, and it definitely achieved what it was aiming to do. It definitely gets its satirical points across. God, I fucking hope to most people. It's one of those things where it's like, I don't think the average person would read it and necessarily mistake it for just standard horror, that like this is actually like intentional and, you know, like genuinely meant by the author. But some people who may be unfamiliar with the genre, or who just aren't familiar with the text itself, some people could definitely mistake it as just genuinely being a like disgusting horror novel. So I do definitely want to put the emphasis on the fact that it is satire. It is like that to bring about change, to prove points and be like, hey, look how fucking stupid y'all are. Because, like, here's a version of it where it's the same things you're doing, but exaggerated to the max. So in that aspect, I do think that it is a really, really good book. But that being said, it's not necessarily an enjoyable read in any way. But again, y'all know what you're getting into at this point. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I had a blast hanging out with y'all. Peace.